She came to South Korea to save lives. She had no idea her own blood would start a war. A 21-year-old black nursing student from Chicago, broke, grieving, completely alone in a foreign country, sits down at a library table with the wrong man. He looks like a graduate student. He speaks like a scholar. But behind those calm, dark eyes is the most dangerous criminal in South Korea. And the secret she's been carrying her entire life, the secret her dying mother never told her, is about to detonate everything. Like and comment your city below so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The rain came down like it had a grudge against the city. Busan in November was not the postcard version the university admissions brochure had shown Imani Brooks back in April. No golden coastline, no shimmering harbor at sunset, no smiling students in warm afternoon light. What the brochure had not shown her was the gray wall of sky that descended on the city sometime in late October and refused to leave. The kind of cold that crept through your coat seams and settled into your back teeth. And the way the neon signs along Seomyeon Boulevard bled their colors into the wet pavement until everything looked like a painting that someone had ruined. Imani stood at the edge of the university's north entrance and looked at the rain and understood, in a way she had not fully understood before, that she was profoundly alone. She had been in South Korea for 11 weeks. She could count on one hand the number of real conversations she had held with another human being since arriving. Real ones, not the transactional exchanges at the pharmacy counter or the strained pleasantries in the nursing simulation lab where the other students smiled at her politely and then turned back to each other and spoke rapidly in Korean about things she couldn't follow. Her Korean was functional. Her Korean was enough to order food and read a prescription label and ask for directions to the subway. It was not enough for belonging. Back home in Chicago, belonging had not been a problem she needed to solve. Her mother had been enough. Denise Brooks had been a whole world by herself. Loud, warm, relentlessly pragmatic. A woman who worked double shifts at Northwestern Memorial and still managed to have dinner on the table at 7 and still managed to sit on the edge of Imani's bed at 11 o'clock at night and listen to whatever catastrophe her daughter needed to process. Denise had not been a woman who did things halfway. Denise had been dead for 4 months and 22 days. Imani knew the count because she woke up every morning and the number was simply there, unavoidable, lodged behind her sternum like a splinter she couldn't reach. 4 months and 22 days since the phone call. 4 months and 22 days since the woman who was her entire architecture had simply stopped. She pulled her hood lower and walked into the rain toward the library. The Sungshin University main library was open until 2 in the morning on weekdays, which was one of the only things Imani had found to be genuinely grateful for since arriving. She had made the library her territory, not because she was particularly disciplined about studying, though she was, but because it was warm and it smelled like paper, and there were other human beings present, even when none of them were paying attention to her. The presence of other people, even strangers, even people who couldn't see her, was something. It was not nothing. She was on a joint academic scholarship, the Korean-American Medical Exchange Program, full tuition, stipend, housing. Competitive enough that the dean at DePaul had called her personally to tell her she'd been selected. Her mother had cried. It was one of the last times Imani had seen her cry. Not from sadness, from the particular relief of a woman watching something she built start to fly. 6 weeks later, the diagnosis. 3 months after that, the call. Imani had considered not coming. She had stood in her mother's apartment for 2 weeks after the funeral, going through drawers and sorting clothes for donation and eating whatever neighbors brought over, and she had thought, I don't have to go anywhere. I can defer. I can stay here and grieve properly and figure out what comes next when I can breathe again. Then she had found the envelope. Her mother had left it in the bottom drawer of her nightstand, beneath a Bible she hadn't opened in years, and a folder of insurance documents and a photograph Imani didn't recognize. A woman she'd never seen before, dark-haired, serious, standing outside a building that looked Asian, some kind of administrative office. The photo old enough that the colors had faded to the soft palette of the early 2000s. On the back of the photo, in her mother's handwriting, "Don't look for it, please." Imani had no idea what that meant. She had put the photo back. The envelope had contained a letter. The letter had said 3 things. Go to Korea. Finish the program. Come home when you're done. Don't let what happened to me stop what's supposed to happen for you. She had boarded the plane 8 days later. Now she shook the rain off her coat in the library entrance foyer and pressed through the heavy glass door into the warmth. The main reading room on the 4th floor was her preferred spot. Long wooden tables, individual lamps, high windows that rattled softly when the wind came off the ocean. At 11 at night on a Thursday, it was sparsely populated. A cluster of undergraduates near the south wall. An older man she recognized as a faculty member, asleep over a stack of journals. 2 girls sharing earbuds, their heads tilted toward each other, giggling quietly at something on a phone screen. And at the center table, the long one she usually had to herself, a man she had never seen before. He was not an undergraduate. That was the first thing she clocked, the way you clocked things when you'd spent 11 weeks reading a room full of strangers. He was older, mid-20s maybe, though something about his stillness made him feel older than that. He sat with perfect posture that didn't look practiced. It looked structural, like his spine had simply never considered slouching as an option. His jacket was dark and expensive in the specific way that expensive things looked when the person wearing them didn't particularly care if you noticed. His hair was black and cut close on the sides. His hands were folded on the table beside a closed laptop, and he was reading a text so dense with notation that Amani couldn't identify the field from across the room. He was the only one sitting at her table. She stood in the entrance of the reading room for a moment and considered her options. The other tables were taken or inadequate, too close to the giggling girls, too far from the outlets, wrong angle on the overhead lights. The center table had 4 empty seats and 2 power strips. She walked over, pulled out the chair across from him and one down, enough distance to signal that she wasn't trying to intrude, and set her bag down. He didn't look up. She settled in, pulled out her pathophysiology textbook and her notebook, unscrewed the cap on her pen. 3 seconds of silence. "Mind if I sit here?" she said. In Korean. The polite register. He looked up then. His eyes were dark and very direct, the kind of eyes that didn't calibrate their intensity based on social cues. He looked at her the way someone looked at a problem they were deciding whether or not to engage with. "You're already sitting," he said. In English. His English was immaculate, barely accented, like someone who had spent years practicing it until the foreign quality was almost gone. "I know," she said. "I'm asking anyway." Something moved across his face. Not quite amusement, the shadow of it maybe. "Sit," he said, and looked back at his book. She sat. She opened her textbook. She did not look at him again for 45 minutes. His name was Kang Min Jae, though she would not learn that for another 3 days. What she learned that first night was smaller things, that he drank his coffee black from a thermos he'd brought himself, that he turned pages with his right hand and made notes in the margins with his left, ambidextrous or close to it, that he was studying something in the economic or financial sector based on the charts she could partially see when he angled his laptop screen to take notes, that he did not fidget, did not check his phone compulsively, did not clear his throat or tap his pen or do any of the small unconscious things people did when they were simply occupying a body and time. He was extraordinarily, almost unnervingly still. She thought graduate student. Serious one, business or finance, probably. Rich family, definitely. That jacket wasn't on any graduate student stipend, reserved in the way that Korean men of a certain background sometimes were in mixed company settings. She thought nothing else about him that night. She packed up at midnight, shouldered her bag, and walked out into the rain. She did not say goodbye. He did not look up. She came back the next night. He was already there. Same table, same seat, same posture, same thermos, same dense, incomprehensible text. She sat down in the same chair she'd used the night before without asking permission this time. He didn't acknowledge her arrival. She didn't expect him to. She opened her notebook. They sat in silence for 2 hours. At one point, she needed to reach across the table for the electric outlet on the far side, and she stretched further than she meant to and knocked her pen off the table. It rolled. He caught it without looking up. Just a hand dropping down below the table edge, a reflex, and then the pen was on the table in front of her. She stared at it. "Thank you," she said. He said. She went back to her notes. The third night, he spoke first. "You're not Korean," he said. Not a question. Not unkind either. Just a statement of the obvious delivered without ceremony. "No," she said. "American?" Chicago. He nodded, like that confirmed something. Nursing program, he said. She looked up. How do you know that? He glanced at her textbook cover. Pathophysiology. A clinical approach. Logical, he said. Graduate student, she said. Yes. Finance? A pause that was almost too short to notice. Economics, he said. Kongmin Jai, he said then, and held out his hand across the table. Formal. Deliberate. She shook it. His grip was dry and precise. Imani Brooks. Imani. He said it carefully, feeling the syllables. It means faith, in Arabic. She hadn't expected that. Yeah, she said. My mom. She liked it. He nodded and looked back at his book. She looked at hers, but something had shifted, imperceptibly, the way temperature shifted when a front moved through, barely perceptible in the moment, but completely undeniable an hour later. She thought about what she'd said. My mom, she liked it, past tense. She hadn't meant to use past tense. She hadn't been ready to explain it. He hadn't asked. 3 weeks passed. The library table became, by unspoken mutual agreement, their table. She arrived by 10. He was already there. Sometimes she arrived and he was not there yet, and she felt his absence in a way that annoyed her when she noticed it. She did not examine that annoyance closely. They talked. Not extensively, not effusively. It was nothing like the conversations she'd had in her dorm back in Chicago, the sprawling late-night talks with her roommate about everything and nothing. These were different. Compressed. A question, an answer, a follow-up that landed precisely. He didn't ask about things she hadn't offered, and she found, gradually, that she was offering more. She told him about Chicago in winter, about the nursing program at DePaul, the one she had deferred, the one she was determined to go back to, about the scholarship and the dean's phone call, about the apartment above the laundromat where she'd grown up, the one that always smelled of warm fabric and someone else's detergent. She did not tell him about her mother, not directly, but the past tense crept in, and he was not a man who missed things. One night, she looked up from her notes and found him watching her, not with the directness he usually deployed, just something quieter, almost careful. You're carrying something heavy, he said. Everyone is, she said. Yes, he said. But you're doing it alone. She didn't have an answer for that. She looked back at her notebook. After a moment, he looked back at his. In those weeks, she also began to notice other things. The phone calls. He always stepped away from the table to take them. Always. And they happened at irregular intervals, sometimes 3 in one evening, sometimes none for days. When he came back from those calls, he sat down and said nothing, and his face was not different exactly, but compressed, like something had been forced back inside a container that wasn't quite big enough. He would sit that way for 2 or 3 minutes, and then he would unfold again, slowly, and the stillness that she had come to think of as simply his nature would return. She also noticed the man who sometimes appeared on the floor below, visible through the railing if she happened to look down. Young, thick-necked, wearing a suit that was wrong for a university library. Not reading anything. Standing near the stairwell and watching the 4th floor. She noticed that man twice before she started to suspect he was watching Min Jae specifically. She did not say anything about this. She told herself it was probably nothing. She was getting better at telling herself things were probably nothing. It was a skill she had developed since her mother died, because the alternative, sitting with the full weight of everything that was wrong and uncertain and terrifying, was not survivable on a daily basis. The coffee came later. She made the mistake, or the accident, she wasn't sure which, of buying 2 cups from the vending machine on the 3rd floor one evening and carrying them both upstairs because the machine had dispensed a second one before she could stop it. Some kind of mechanical error, and she set one down in front of him without thinking about it. He looked at it. He looked at her. He picked it up and drank it. That was that. After that, whoever arrived first bought 2 cups. She arrived first on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. He arrived first the other nights. The coffee was terrible, thin, over-sugared from a machine that didn't understand the concept of modulation, but it was warm and it was something. One Thursday night in early December, the rain had turned briefly to something close to sleet. and she had run the last block from the subway station and arrived in the library lobby wet and breathing hard, her coat darkened across the shoulders. Her hair, which she kept natural, a rounded cloud of tight coils, beaded with water. She pushed through the glass door and stood in the warm lobby for a moment, just breathing, and when she got upstairs, he was already there with 2 cups. He looked at her wet coat. He looked at her hair. He said nothing. He pushed one of the cups across the table. She sat down and wrapped both hands around it. "It's getting worse," she said. "About the weather." "Yes," he said. "I keep thinking it'll stop being shocking," she said. "The cold. I grew up in Chicago. It's not like I don't know what cold is." "It's different cold," he said. "It comes off the water here. It's heavier." "Yeah," she exhaled. "Yeah, that's exactly it. It's heavier." She looked at him. He was looking at his laptop screen, but not reading. She could tell the difference by now, the way his eyes moved versus the way they stilled. He was thinking. "Do you ever walk?" she asked. "After, when you leave here." He turned his head slightly. "Sometimes." "Along the harbor?" "Sometimes," he said again. She looked at her coffee. "The harbor at night is beautiful," she said. It wasn't an invitation. She wasn't sure what it was. "Yes," he said, after a pause. "It is." The next Tuesday, he suggested the walk himself. Matter of fact, like a scheduling note. After the library, if she wasn't tired, the waterfront route along Guangan Bridge was visible from the South Promenade. He said it and then looked back at his screen, and she understood that he was not going to restate the offer or hedge it or look at her anxiously waiting for a response. She could take it, or she could leave it. She said, "Sure." They walked for an hour in the cold. The bridge was lit in sequences of color that reflected across the black water, being deep blue to green to purple, a slow cycling that made the harbor look like a hallucination. He walked with his hands in his coat pockets. She walked with hers crossed over her chest. They talked about small things, a paper he was writing, a difficult faculty member she'd had in simulation lab, the particular quality of street food from the pojang matcha carts near the university gate. At one point, they passed a grandmother selling roasted chestnuts from a cart near the waterfront railing, and Amani bought a paper cone of them and held it out to him, and he looked at it for a moment before taking a small handful, and she ate the rest walking, and the heat from the paper cone worked up through her palms. She thought, "This is the most comfortable I have been since my mother died." She didn't examine that thought. She put it away. They walked back to the subway station. He did not offer to walk her home. She had not expected him to. At the station entrance, they stopped. "Same time Thursday," she said. "Yes," he said. She went down the stairs. She did not look back. Mad. December deepened. She was falling behind in pharmacology. Not catastrophically, but enough to feel it, the readings piling up, the simulation sessions demanding more than her divided attention could supply. Her attention was divided because she was sleeping badly, had been since Chicago, the grief working on her unconscious in ways she couldn't fully manage. She was also spending more time than she should outside the library. The walks had become a weekly thing, sometimes twice a week, and they were lasting longer. She told herself she was fine. She told herself the pharmacology would catch up. She told herself the walks were just walks. She was not fully honest with herself on any of these points. One evening, in the second week of December, she arrived at the library table to find him already there, and 3 chairs away from the table, standing, on the phone. This was unusual. He always stepped away to take calls. She set down her bag and sat and didn't look up. But she could hear his voice from 3 chairs over, very low, and it was different. Not the calm, measured tone he used when he spoke to her. Tighter, pressurized, as if the words were being controlled very deliberately. The way you controlled your voice when the alternative was something you couldn't afford. He was speaking Korean, fast and technical, full of terminology she didn't know. She caught maybe a third of it. She heard shipment and corridor and a word she didn't recognize, but that seemed to function as a proper noun, a place name maybe, or an organization. She heard him say something that she parsed roughly as not yet, or it's not time yet, and then something harder and clipped that she couldn't follow. He ended the call and came back to the table and sat and placed his phone face down and was silent for 90 seconds. She counted. She did not look up. Then he said, Sorry. For what? She said. The intrusion. You weren't intruding, she said. It's a table. You can talk. He said nothing. She could feel him not saying things. It was one of the things she had learned about him over the past weeks. His silences were not empty. They were dense. They had weight. Everything okay? She said. A pause. Business complication, he said. What kind of business are you in exactly? She asked. She had asked variations of this before, gently, obliquely, and he had redirected each time with the practiced ease of someone who had developed those redirections over years. Graduate research, he said. She looked up then. He was looking at his laptop screen, but he knew she was looking at him. The set of his jaw was slightly different than usual. Min Jae, she said. He turned his head. I'm not trying to push, she said. You can say it's none of my business, but you don't have to keep pretending you're just an economics student. He was very still for a long moment. Then he said, What makes you say that? The calls, she said. The way you move. The guy who watches you from downstairs. She paused. You notice him too. You've clocked his position every single night for 3 weeks. Something changed behind his eyes. It wasn't alarm. He was too controlled for alarm to show cleanly. But it was the recognition of something. You're observant, he said. His voice was neutral. Careful. Nursing student, she said. You have to be. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked away. I have some family obligations, he said, that are complicated. She let that land and said nothing. After a moment, she nodded once and went back to her notes. She did not push. She was not fundamentally someone who pushed people toward things they weren't ready for. Her mother had been that kind of person, and she had learned it early. You didn't push. You stayed steady and you stayed present, and eventually people walked toward you on their own because they needed the steadiness more than they needed the privacy. 2 days later, he brought her mother up himself. They were on the waterfront walk, and she had said something about Christmas, about how it was going to be strange this year, the first one, and she hadn't fully thought through how strange yet. And he had asked, very quietly, what made it strange, and before she knew what she was doing, she had said, My mom died in August, and the words were out and the cold air was around them, and the bridge was cycling through its colors, and there was nothing to do about it. He stopped walking. She stopped too. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say all the things people said, the things she had been hearing for 4 months that scraped against some raw internal surface. He stood on the promenade with the harbor wind coming off the water and looked at her and said, Tell me about her. She stared at him. If you want to, he said. She didn't. She was not ready. She had not talked about her mother, really talked, to anyone since the funeral, and she was not going to start on a waterfront promenade in the freezing Busan harbor in December with a man she had known for 3 weeks. But the words came anyway. She talked for 40 minutes. About Denise Brooks, RN, Northwestern Memorial, 12 years of double shifts and still home for dinner. The smell of her mother's perfume. The particular sound of her laugh. The way she argued with the television during the evening news and always lost. The birthday card she kept in a shoebox. The way she had looked at Amani when she got the scholarship call. Exhausted and exhilarated and proud in a way that had nothing to do with ego, pure and clean and total. Min Jae walked beside her the whole time. He didn't interrupt. When she finally stopped, running dry, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, She sounds like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. It was the right thing. She wasn't sure how he knew it was the right thing, but it was. She didn't cry. She had cried herself empty in the weeks after Chicago, and she wasn't sure there was much left, or maybe the cold helped, or maybe it was just this. The relief of saying it out loud to someone who listened and didn't try to fix it. Yeah, she said. She did. They walked back without talking much after that. At the subway entrance, she stopped. Thank you, she said. For what? He said. She shook her head. She didn't have the language for it. She went down the stairs. What she did not know then, what she would not know for another 2 weeks, was that 1 floor below the library reading room. On the 3rd floor, the thick-necked man she had noticed at the stairwell was not watching Min Jae because he worked for Min Jae. He was watching Min Jae because he had been sent by someone who needed to know how much time the Dragon Crown's youngest boss was spending with a foreign girl. A nursing student, American, black, name of Imani Brooks, Chicago. And his boss, back in a glass and steel office tower in Seoul, had run the name and found something extraordinary. He had found a bloodline. The Dragon Crown Syndicate did not get its name from vanity. It got its name from territory. The Crown, in this case, meaning the upper tier of Busan's port operations, the crown jewel of the Korean coast. Whoever controlled the port traffic controlled the flow of goods that were not supposed to flow. Pharmaceuticals, electronics, currency, arms. It was a quiet empire, maintained through infrastructure and fear in roughly equal proportion, and it had been run for 7 years by Min Jae's predecessor, a man named Oh Jae-sung, who had died of cancer 18 months ago, and left the organization to the one person who understood its architecture well enough to hold it. Min Jae had been 23 when he took over. He had not wanted it. He had also not been in a position to refuse. His father had been a mid-level enforcer for the syndicate. His older brother had been a logistics coordinator. When his brother was killed during a territorial dispute with a rival faction out of Daejeon, and his father had drunk himself out of usefulness in the year that followed, and Oh Jae-sung had needed a successor who was young enough to reshape the organization, but intelligent enough not to destroy it, Min Jae had been the solution that presented itself. He was not, by nature, a violent man. This was one of the things that made him effective. The truly violent men in the syndicate, the ones who reached for force as a first language, were useful tools, but they were also predictable, and predictability was the central vulnerability in any criminal enterprise. Min Jae thought in systems. He read markets the way other men read people. He had understood, before anyone around him had, that the future of an organization like the syndicate was not in territory. Territory was a legacy concept, brittle and expensive to maintain, but in information. Who moved what, when, through which intermediaries. The data was more valuable than the cargo. He had been, in the language of the world he occupied, a good boss, efficient, cold-blooded when the math required it, loyal to the people inside the inner circle and entirely without mercy for threats that emerged outside it. But in the 2 years since he had taken over, a restlessness had developed in him that he could not name and had not been able to excise. He had begun to spend more time in Busan than Seoul, telling himself it was operational. The port was here, the primary logistics chain was here, but knowing that the pull was something else, something like distance. He had enrolled in the graduate economics program at Sungshin because it gave him cover for his Busan presence and because he had actually wanted to, which was a fact he kept private. His underboss, Choi Dong-wook, thought it was a calculated move. Min Jae let him think so. He had not expected the nursing student. He had not expected any of this. The coffee, the walks, the way she listened. He was not a man with many people in his life who actually listened to him. He had subordinates, and he had Choi, and he had the outer ring of associates who would do whatever he required. He had no one who looked at him and said, "You don't have to keep pretending," and then simply waited, without pressure, without agenda, until he decided what to do with that. It made him careful. It made him cautious in a way that had nothing to do with operational security. He was careful because he could see, very clearly, where this was going if he let it go, and he understood that if it went there, he would be bringing her into something she had no concept of, something that would not be survivable for her if it went wrong. He was careful. He was also, despite himself, looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays in a way he had not looked forward to anything in years. The file landed on Choi Dong-wook's desk on a Wednesday afternoon in the third week of December. The surveillance team's report was thorough. Photographs, timestamps, behavioral analysis. The boss had been spending 12 to 16 hours per week in the company of one Imani Brooks, 21, American national, enrolled in the Korean-American Medical Exchange Program at Sungshin University, currently residing in university housing. Choi had read the report twice before he reached for the secondary document. The background file his intelligence coordinator had prepared on the girl herself. He had expected the file to be thin. Students from Chicago were not typically of operational interest. What he found instead made him set down his coffee and read the document 3 times, very slowly, and then sit in his leather chair for 15 minutes in total silence. Imani Brooks. Mother. Denise Brooks. Nay Kim, born Seoul, 1975, immigrated to the United States, 1999. Formerly known as Kim Soo-yeon. And then, further down, the lineage that his intelligence coordinator had cross-referenced against the Park organization's known genealogy. Biological father, Park Seong-hun, chairman of the Park dynasty, ruler of the rival empire that controlled the Seoul-Incheon corridor. The man who had been the Dragon Crown's primary obstacle for 6 years. His daughter. Hidden. Raised abroad under her mother's American identity, deliberately obscured, never registered in the Korean family system, never acknowledged. And she was sitting in a library in Busan having coffee with the Dragon Crown's youngest boss 4 nights a week. Choi Dong-wook read the document one more time. Then he picked up his phone and made 2 calls, neither of them to Min Jae. Imani knew something was wrong before she understood what was wrong. It was a physical thing first. She woke up the Friday before Christmas with a feeling of wrongness that she couldn't locate. A low-grade hum of unease that she told herself was holiday dread. The first Christmas without her mother pressing down on her before she was fully conscious. She pushed through it. She went to the simulation lab. She ate lunch alone at the campus cafeteria. She came back to her room. The text from Minji came at 7 in the evening. He used the messaging app they'd been communicating through since November. Nothing formal, usually just logistical, library or no. Sometimes waterfront after if you want. Sometimes just her name, which she had come to understand was his version of "Are you okay?" This text was different. "Don't come to the library tonight. Stay in housing." She stared at her phone. She typed back, "Why?" 3 minutes passed. "Just tonight. I'll explain Thursday." Min Jae. "Nothing. You're scaring me." And then, after another long minute, "I know. I'm sorry. Please just stay in." She put her phone down and looked at the ceiling of her dormitory room and felt the low-grade unease sharpen and concentrate into something with an edge to it. She had been a nursing student long enough to know the difference between anxiety and the particular quality of fear that arrived when something was actually wrong. This was the second kind. She stayed in. She did not sleep well. Thursday arrived without incident. She went to the library. He was there. He looked like he hadn't slept. Or if he had, it hadn't helped. There were shadows under his eyes that she hadn't seen before. And his stillness was of a different quality than usual. Not the controlled stillness of concentration, but the controlled stillness of someone managing something acute. She sat down. She did not pour the coffee. She looked at him. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. He looked at his closed laptop. He was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "There are people," he said carefully, "who have taken an interest in you." "What kind of people?" she said. He looked at her then. "The kind you don't want interested in you," he said. "Why would anyone be interested in me?" she said. "I'm a nursing student on a scholarship. I've been here for 3 months. I don't know anyone here. I don't know anything about—" She stopped. She reset. "Is this connected to you, to whatever it is you actually do?" He held her gaze. He said nothing, and his silence was the loudest thing in the room. "Min Jae," she said. "You need to be careful," he said. "For the next few weeks, until I can manage this, you need to not deviate from your routine. University, housing, library. Nowhere you haven't been before." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." She stared at him. The weeks of patience, of not pushing, of staying steady and waiting for him to walk toward her. She felt all of it straining against a completely different impulse. The impulse that said, "He is not being straight with you, and you deserve to know why." "I trusted you," she said, quietly, without drama. He flinched. It was the first time she had ever seen him flinch. "I know," he said. "Is that going to mean anything?" He looked at her for a long moment. The library was quiet around them. The overhead lamps hummed. Somewhere on a lower floor, a door opened and closed. "Give me 2 weeks," he said. "I need 2 weeks." She held his gaze. She said, 2 weeks. She did not say, "And then what?" She did not say, "What are you protecting me from, and why do you need to protect me? And who exactly are you when you're not sitting at this table pretending to study economics?" She said 2 weeks. and she picked up her pen, and she opened her notebook, and she did not look at him again for the rest of the evening. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew yet, because Minjai's intelligence arrived 23 minutes later via an emergency communication to his phone that made him stand up from the table abruptly and step away, was that the 2 weeks he'd asked for didn't exist anymore. Choi Dong-wook had moved the timeline. The orders had gone out that afternoon, and 3 black SUVs were already on their way to Busan Harbor. Min-jae's phone buzzed against his palm, and he was on his feet before the second vibration landed. Amani watched him stand. She watched the color shift in his face. Not drain exactly, more like compress, like the blood was pulling inward toward something vital. He looked at his screen for 3 seconds. 3 seconds that had a quality she had never seen on him before. Uncontrolled. Raw. The face of a man processing something that didn't fit inside any framework he'd built. Then the framework snapped back. The stillness returned, manufactured this time. She could see the seams of it. He looked at her. "Get your things," he said. "What?" "Right now, Amani. Your bag, your coat. Get them." She didn't move for a half second. Refusal. Instinct, the part of her that didn't take orders from anyone. And then something in his eyes moved her. Not fear, urgency. The specific urgency of someone who has just looked at a clock and found that there is almost no time left. She got her things. He was already on the phone as she stood, speaking Korean in that low pressurized voice she'd heard before at the table, but faster now, the control thinner over the top of it. She caught fragments. Harbor. Tonight, they moved it up. She caught a word she'd heard before and still couldn't place. A name, she thought now, not a location. An organization. He ended the call and took her arm, not roughly, but with a directness that left no interpretive room, and moved her toward the stairwell. "Where are we going?" she said. "Out," he said. "That's not an answer." "I know." He pushed through the stairwell door, and they were moving down, his hand on her elbow, 3 floors in under 90 seconds. "When we get outside, you stay close to me. Left side. Whatever happens, you don't run unless I tell you to run." "What is happening?" she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Something cold and clinical was rising in her. The nursing school part. The part that had been trained to stay functional in crisis. She leaned into it. "Talk to me. Right now. What is happening?" "I will explain everything," he said. "I need 30 minutes and a location that isn't this building." They hit the ground floor and he stopped at the lobby door, one hand on the glass, looking through it at the street. She could see his eyes moving. Left, right, the vehicles parked at the curb, a man smoking outside the convenience store across the street. He was reading the scene with a speed and precision that had nothing to do with graduate economics. "The man on your right," she said. "Blue jacket, standing too still." Min-jae looked. "Yes," he said. "He's been there since I came in," she said. "I noticed him on my way up." He turned and looked at her sideways. There was something in that look. Not surprise exactly, more like a recalibration. Like he was adjusting an estimate. "Side exit," he said. "Parking level." They went through the service corridor. The car was a dark gray sedan, nothing conspicuous, parked on the lowest level of the university's underground lot. He unlocked it without using the fob, physical key, deliberate. And she got in the passenger side, and he was in and moving before she had her seatbelt on. "Who are you?" she said. Not accusatory. She was past accusatory. She was at the other thing, the place past anger where you just needed the truth because the alternatives were worse. He drove up the ramp and turned right, away from the main street, into a side route that ran behind the administrative buildings. He checked the mirrors. He checked them again. "My name is Kang Min-jae," he said. That part was true. And the rest? The rest, he exhaled. "I run an organization, criminal organization, based in Busan, operations across the southern coast." She absorbed that. The nursing school part of her was taking inventory, breathing, normal, hands steady, heart rate elevated but not unmanageable. "What kind of organization?" she said. "Port operations, logistics, the things that move through ports that aren't supposed to move." He said it flat, without apology or performance. I've run it for 2 years. Before me, a man named O. Before him, others. You're a crime boss, she said. Yes. She looked at the road ahead. The city was dark and wet, the streetlights blurring in the rain. And me, she said. Why does any of this touch me? He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him deciding something. Not whether to tell her, she thought. He'd already decided that. He was deciding how. My underboss, he said, man named Choi Dong-wook. He runs day-to-day operations, enforcement, the things I don't personally manage. He turned onto a coastal road heading south, away from the main harbor. 3 weeks ago, Choi had you surveilled, had a background file prepared on you. Why? Because of me, he said, and she heard something tighten in his voice that was the closest thing to guilt she'd ever heard from him. Because he noticed I was spending time with you, and he wanted to know who you were. Standard security procedure for anyone in proximity to leadership. Okay, she said. And what did his file say? Min-jae's hands adjusted on the wheel. The rain picked up, drumming on the roof. Your mother, he said, her name, her real name before she immigrated. Imani turned her head slowly. What about my mother's name? Kim Soo-yeon, he said. That was her name. Before she became Denise Brooks, before Chicago, before you. Imani's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She stared at him and felt something she couldn't name tilting in the base of her stomach. Vertigo, but not physical. Something deeper. My mother's name was Denise. She was American. She was born in Seoul, Min-jae said. She immigrated to the United States in 1999. She changed her name. She built a life that had no paper trail back to who she had been. Why? Imani said. Her voice had gone flat, which meant the clinical part was working overtime, pressing down on something that needed pressing down on. He looked at her once, quickly, then back at the road. Because of who your father is, he said. The rain, the headlights in the wet pavement, the sound of her own breathing. My father is dead, she said. My mother told me he died before I was born. Your mother, Min-jae said carefully, was protecting you, from the moment you were born. From what? From the world he occupies. He slowed the car, turned onto a narrow road that curved down toward the water, pulled off at an overlook above the harbor, and stopped. Killed the lights. Below them the port was lit in industrial orange and white, cranes standing like sentinels over rows of shipping containers. Your father is Park Seong-hoon, he said, chairman of the Park dynasty. He controls the Seoul Incheon corridors from ports, logistics, finance, the largest criminal organization in the country. The silence after that had a physical weight. Imani sat with it. She let it sit on her. She made herself breathe in and breathe out and do the thing she'd been trained to do, which was not to react to the first wave of anything, but to let it pass and see what was underneath. What was underneath was rage. You knew, she said. How long have you known? 4 hours, he said. My intelligence coordinator intercepted Choi's file this evening. I had it 20 minutes before I texted you to stay in. But Choi has had this for how long? Min-jae's jaw tightened. At least a week, he said. A week, she said. He's known for a week who I supposedly am, and you're only finding out tonight. He kept it from me, Min-jae said. And there was something in those 4 words. Controlled. Very controlled. But underneath the control was something cold and furious that she could feel radiating off him like heat in reverse. He was supposed to report directly to me. Any intelligence regarding persons in my proximity goes to me first. But he didn't. No. Why not? He looked at her. Because Choi Dong-wook has his own agenda, he said. He has been building towards something for months. I suspected it. I didn't move fast enough. What agenda? She said. He looked back out at the harbor. Your father's empire, he said. The Park dynasty and the Dragon Crown have been in a cold standoff for 6 years. Neither side moves against the other because the cost is too high. Mutually assured destruction. He paused. But if someone had leverage over Park Seong-hoon, something personal, something he would trade everything to protect. She understood it before he finished. The cold thing in her stomach went colder. Me, she said. Yes. Choi wants to take me to use against Park. Yes. And you, she said, where do you land in this? He turned to look at her fully. I was ordered to help facilitate it, he said. Choi sent me the operational file tonight. I'm supposed to confirm your location and stand down while his team moves. She looked at him. The rain on the windshield, the glow of the harbor below them. And instead you're here, she said. Instead I'm here, he said. She wanted to find something to say that wasn't inadequate. She couldn't. She looked out at the harbor and said, he knows you've gone off script. By now, probably, yes. Those 3 SUVs at the harbor, she said. You know about them. Yes. How long before they find us? He checked his watch. It was a small gesture, precise. 20 minutes, he said. Maybe 30. I know Choi's operating protocols. He'll send to the library first, then housing, then work outward. Then we need to move, she said. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, not quite. The recalibration again. Most people, he said, in this situation. I'm not most people, she said. And we are burning time. What's the play? He was quiet for 2 seconds. Then he started the car. Dutcham. They drove north for 40 minutes. He made 3 calls, all brief, all in Korean, too fast and technical for her to follow. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the city give way to the highway corridor, and then to the darker patches between cities, industrial zones, port facilities, stretches of road where the only lights were the headlights themselves. She thought about her mother. She thought about the envelope, the letter, the photograph with the faded colors. Don't look for it, please. She thought about what her mother had known for 21 years and had carried alone, and the magnitude of that carrying hit her in the chest like a fist. She didn't say anything. She processed. Min-jae drove with his eyes forward and his hands steady on the wheel, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way they sat a fraction of an inch higher than usual, the way his right hand was slightly tighter on the wheel than his left. He was managing something, several somethings. At some point north of the city, he said, your mother knew who she was running from. She built an identity that was airtight, kept you completely off the Korean registries. You have no legal record in this country, no family documentation. She must have spent years constructing the cover. She was a nurse, Amani said. She worked night shifts. She made pot roast on Sundays. She paused. She never once mentioned Korea except to say she'd visited once when she was young. She was protecting you, he said. Everything she did was for that. She sent me here, Amani said. The realization had been forming since the car, and now it arrived fully. She sent me here on purpose. The scholarship. She encouraged me to apply. She pushed me toward it. She stared at the road ahead. Why would she do that? If she was hiding me from... I don't know, Min-jae said. But she must have had a reason. Imani turned that over. Her mother had been a precise woman, deliberate. Every decision she'd ever made had had a reason. If she had sent Imani to the one country she'd spent 20 years hiding her from, she had done it because the calculus changed, because something had shifted, because she knew she was dying, Imani thought, because she knew she wasn't going to be there to protect me anymore. And she decided that whatever was here was less dangerous than being alone. She pressed her knuckles hard against her sternum and held them there. Where are we going? She said. Safe house, he said. Outside the city. One of 2 locations that only I know. I've never disclosed them to Choi or anyone in the organization. You planned for this, she said. You had a contingency. He was quiet. For what? She said. For what scenario did you plan to need to run from your own people? Another silence. Then, slowly, I've known for about a year that Choi was building towards something I wasn't going to like. I didn't know what. I started preparing exit options. An exit from what? The organization? From the position. He glanced at her. I've been trying to find a way out for a long time. She looked at him and thought about all the nights at the table. The phone calls, the compressed silences, the weight she had sensed in him but had attributed to pressure, not to the specific pressure of a man trying to figure out how to walk away from something that didn't let people walk away. She thought about the walks on the waterfront, the way he looked at the harbor with something that wasn't admiration and wasn't contempt, but was somewhere between The look of a man who knew an empire when he saw one and was tired of it. You were going to leave, she said. I was working on it, he said, quietly. These things take time. And now, he said, Choi has accelerated every timeline that existed. The safe house was a 2-floor structure set back from a rural road above the coast, 3/4 of an hour north of Busan. Not a mansion, not a shack, a functional house that had been maintained and provisioned without any personality, like a space that had been built for utility and nothing else. He parked in the back, unlocked it with a physical key again, and they went inside. He switched on a single lamp in the main room. The space was clean, spare, a couch, a table, a kitchen with stocked cabinets, a landline that he picked up immediately to check for a dial tone. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at him. The lamp made the shadows under his eyes darker. He looked, for the first time since she'd met him, tired in the bone-deep way that couldn't be managed or performed around. Talk, she said. He set the phone down. He turned to face her. I can get you out of the country, he said. I have contacts at Gimhae Airport. A private charter can have you in Chicago by tomorrow night. That's not what I asked, she said. It's what I'm offering. I don't want to leave, she said. I want to understand what's happening. Imani, don't. Her voice had an edge she hadn't planned. Don't do that. Don't manage me. I have spent 11 weeks being careful and patient and not pushing when you weren't ready, and that was my choice, and I'm not sorry for it. But this is different. This is my life. This is my mother's life. Whatever she hid from me and whatever she decided I needed to find, I have the right to know it, all of it. He looked at her. He didn't manage his expression back to neutral this time. He let it stay where it was, and what it was complicated, something like guilt, something like respect, something like fear. Not for himself, she thought, for her. If you go back out there, he said, there's no clean way through this. Choi's network covers most of the southern coast. Your father's people will become aware of the situation within hours, if they aren't already. And the Dragon Crown's enforcer units, I understand the risks, she said. I don't think you do, he said. Not fully. Not yet. Then help me understand them, she said. Instead of trying to put me on a plane. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Your father has been looking for you. She blinked. Not aggressively. He's been careful. He didn't want to expose the search in case someone used it against him. But my intelligence team picked up secondary inquiries over the last 3 years, quiet, through intermediaries. He's been looking. He paused. I didn't know who they were looking for until tonight. Imani sat down on the couch, not because her legs were failing her, but because she needed to be lowered to the ground for a moment. He knew I existed, she said. He's always known, Min-jae said. He let your mother go because she asked him to, but he never stopped knowing. She pressed both palms flat on her thighs. Outside the window, the rain had softened to a drizzle that hissed against the glass. She could hear the ocean somewhere below the ridge, a low rhythmic sound that had nothing to do with any of this, and was somehow the only thing keeping her anchored. You lied to me, she said. Quiet. No drama in it. Yes, he said. The whole time, the table, the coffee, the walks. You knew who I was. I didn't know who you were, he said. Not until 4 hours ago. She looked at him. But you were watching me, she said, before the table. That's what you do. You don't sit down at a library table without knowing who else is in the room. He held her gaze. He didn't deny it. I noticed you, he said finally. I noticed you the first night and I thought, I ran a basic background check. Scholarship student, exchange program, no connections of operational interest. Clean. He paused. And then I kept noticing you. For a different reason. Yes. He said it without looking away. A different reason. She held that in the space between them. And the background check you ran, she said. It didn't find the same thing Choi's people found. My team isn't as thorough as Choi's intelligence coordinator, he said, and there was a bitterness in it that was specific. The bitterness of a man realizing how far his second-in-command had extended his reach without his knowledge. Choi has been cultivating sources inside the immigration ministry for 2 years. Resources I didn't know about. He could access records that my team couldn't. Which means he's been building toward betrayal for a long time, she said. Yes, She looked at the lamp, the single pool of yellow light in the bare room. She thought about her mother's handwriting on the back of the photograph. Don't look for it, please. She thought about the letter. Go to Korea. Her mother, who planned everything, who was precise in everything, who had spent 20 years building a wall between her daughter and this world. Her mother had told her to go, had wanted her to go. She thought, maybe she wasn't telling me to find my father. Maybe she was telling me to find something else. Maybe she was telling me to be ready. Ready for what? She didn't know. But sitting in this bare room in a safe house above the Busan coast with a mafia boss who had tried and failed to put her on a plane home, she understood one thing very clearly. The life she had been living up until tonight was already gone. It had been gone the moment she sat down at that table. Maybe it had been gone before she ever boarded the plane. She looked at Min Jae and said, I'm not going to Chicago. He said nothing. Tell me about my father, she said. Tell me what you know about Park Seong-hun. He pulled the chair from the table and sat across from her. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor between them for a moment. When he looked up, his face had the quality of a man who has stopped managing and decided to just tell the truth. He's 62, he said. He built the Park dynasty from a mid-level import operation in the late 90s. By 2005, he controlled Incheon Port. By 2010, he was the most powerful criminal figure in the country. He paused. He's not a violent man by preference. He uses violence as a last resort, which is what makes him dangerous. The men who only use violence as a last resort are the ones who have every other tool already mastered. He paused again. He has 3 legitimate businesses: shipping, real estate, a pharmaceutical distribution network. He has 2 known sons, both working inside the dynasty. He has... Min Jae stopped. He has a daughter he doesn't know he's about to meet, Amani said. Yes. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. Outside, something moved in the dark beyond the window. A branch in the wind, nothing more. And both of them looked at it simultaneously. And then Min Jae's phone lit up. He grabbed it, looked at the screen. His face went to stone. What? She said. He turned the phone to show her. A photograph. Low resolution, shot from a distance, but clear enough. The university library. The 4th floor. Their table. From an angle that meant the camera had been positioned on the floor above, looking down. And sitting at the table, the 2 of them, from 6 nights ago, she estimated, based on her coat, heads angled toward each other over coffee cups. Beneath the photo, a text message from a number she didn't recognize. 3 lines. She's not worth it, Min Jae. Return her to us by dawn. If you don't, we'll go through you to get to her, and then we'll send what we know to Park Seong-hun ourselves and let him watch what we do to his daughter on camera. Amani read it twice. Min Jae's thumb was pressed against the side of the phone, hard enough that the knuckle had gone pale. How many men does Choi have? She said. Steady. The clinical part fully deployed now, which was the only part of her that could function in this particular moment. 40, Min Jae said. 60 maybe if he's called in regional units. And you? Here. Tonight? He looked up. 2 contacts I can reach inside the hour. 2 more by morning. That's not enough, she said. No, he said. She stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark ridge and the black strip of ocean beyond it. She thought about 60 men against 2 contacts and a man who was trying to leave an empire he'd never asked for, and she thought about her father somewhere north of here in a fortified estate who had been quietly looking for her for 3 years and didn't know she was standing in his country with a target on her. She turned around. Then we need my father, she said. Min Jae looked at her. You said he's been looking for me, she said. Then we give him what he's been looking for. We find a way to contact Park Seong-hun tonight, and we tell him that Choi Dong-wook has his daughter and plans to put her on camera. She held Min Jae's gaze. And then we let the Park dynasty respond to that. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Not the silence of uncertainty. The silence of 2 people standing on the edge of something and looking down and understanding that stepping off is not optional anymore. Min Jae looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face that she hadn't seen there before. Something that might have been, in a different life, under different circumstances. Something moved across his face that she hadn't seen there before. something that might have been, in a different life, under different circumstances, the beginning of admiration. And then it closed back down, and he was already reaching for the second phone he'd pulled from the inside pocket of his jacket, the one she hadn't known existed until this moment. "There's a man," he said, "Han Byung-soo. He's been a go-between for the Park dynasty and neutral parties for 15 years. If anyone can get a message to Park Seong-hun tonight, it's him." "You trust him?" "I trust that he values his neutrality more than any single alliance," Min-jae said, "which means he won't burn us to Choi. It also means he'll charge us for the contact." "What's the price?" "Favors," he said. "The currency out here is always favors." He was already dialing. "Stay back from the window." She moved back. She stood in the center of the room and listened to him speak and watched his face and thought about her mother on a plane in 1999, leaving everything she knew, carrying a secret that would take 22 years to detonate. The call lasted 4 minutes. When he ended it, he said, "Han will pass the message. He says Park has a listening post in Busan. He'll have eyes on our location within the hour if he's interested." "If," she said. "He'll be interested," Min-jae said. But the word landed with a weight to it that she noticed. Something underneath it that wasn't quite certainty. She noticed it and filed it and said nothing. "But I'm tempted." They waited. It was the worst kind of waiting, the kind with a hard edge on it, where every minute that passed was a minute that Choi's network was narrowing the search radius. Min-jae turned off the lamp at her suggestion. They sat in the dark, he at the table with his phone face down, she on the couch with her coat still on. And the only light came from the thin strip of cloud-filtered dark outside the windows and the faint glow of the coastal road below the ridge. At some point he said, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" she said. "Someone who would fall apart," he said, "or freeze. Most people, when the floor drops out—" "I've had practice," she said. "The floor dropped out in August. I've been standing on nothing for 4 months. You get used to the sensation." He was quiet. Then, "I'm sorry. About your mother. About all of it. The table. The pretense. I want you to know that the things I told you were real. Everything I said that was about me, not the cover. That was real." She looked at his shape in the dark. "I know," she said. "You know." "I can tell the difference between a man performing and a man talking," she said. "I've been watching you for 3 months. The calls, the silences, the walks. When you talked about wanting something different, that wasn't performed." He said nothing for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "It wasn't." The phone on the table lit up. He grabbed it, read the screen. His body changed, not dramatically, just the subtle reconfiguration of a man who has received news and is deciding what it means before he shows it to anyone. "Han?" she said. "No," he said. "My intelligence coordinator in Busan. One of the two I can still trust." He read it again. "Choi's units are at the university housing complex. They're going room to room. They won't find me there." "No, but they'll find your things, your passport." He set the phone down. "He's escalating faster than I expected." "Because he's afraid," she said. Min-jae looked at her. "If he was confident, he'd take his time," she said. "The speed means he's worried about something, about you, about what you'll do." She paused. "He knows you came off script. He doesn't know what that means yet." Min-jae was quiet for a moment. "You think clearly under pressure," he said. "Nursing school," she said again. "High-stakes simulation, twice a week for 2 years. You either learn to think or you freeze, and freezing gets people killed." A pause in the dark room. The ocean below the ridge. Somewhere far off, on the coastal road, a single pair of headlights moved and were gone. Then the second phone, the one he'd used to call Han, lit up with an incoming call. He looked at the screen. She watched his face. He answered it, put it on speaker, set it on the table between them. A voice came through, male, low, carrying the particular quality of a man who had not needed to raise his voice in a very long time. "Min-jae si," the voice said. "I understand you have something that belongs to me." Amani's hands pressed flat against her thighs. Min-jae said, "Chairman Park, Han tells me," the voice said, "that my daughter is sitting in a room with you. He tells me Choi Dong-wook intends to use her as a weapon." A pause. "He tells me you chose not to let that happen." "Yes," Min-jae said. Why? The voice said. Simple, without inflection. The question of a man who had spent decades reading people's reasons and finding them almost universally inadequate. Min-jae looked at Amani across the table. She held his gaze. Because it was wrong, he said, and because she deserved better than being a tool in someone else's war. The silence on the line lasted 5 seconds. 10. Then, put her on. Min-jae slid the phone toward her. Imani looked at it. She thought about all the things she could say, all the ways this conversation could begin. The anger, the confusion, the sheer mountainous weight of 21 years of not knowing. She thought about her mother's voice, her mother's hands, her mother's deliberate and total silence on this subject for her entire life. She picked up the phone. Hello, she said. Another silence. When he spoke again, the quality had changed. Barely, almost imperceptibly. But it had changed. Something had come into it. You sound like her, he said. Amani's throat closed. She swallowed against it. I need you to send people, she said. Choi Dong-wook has 60 men moving in this area. We need extraction. A pause. You're not going to ask me anything? Not right now, she said. Right now I need to not be captured by your enemy. We can talk about everything else after. Another silence. Then something that might, under different sonic circumstances, have been a short exhale of something close to recognition. Coordinates, he said. Min-jae leaned forward and read them off the phone's GPS. 40 minutes, Park said, and the line went dead. That's it. 31 minutes later, the headlights came. Not from the coastal road below, from the ridge road above, which meant they had come from the north, which meant Park Seong-hun had people already staged in Busan that neither Min-jae nor Choi had known about. Min-jae saw the lights first and was at the window, and then stepped back, his hand going inside his jacket. It's them, Amani said. She didn't know how she knew. She knew. 2 black vehicles pulled into the rear yard. 4 men got out, moving with the practiced deficiency of people who did this regularly, all in dark clothing. One of them knocked on the back door. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. Min-jae opened it. The man at the door was in his 50s, silver-haired, with a face that had been broken at least once, and had reset slightly off-center. He looked at Min-jae with the flat professional assessment of someone who had been told to work with a man he didn't know yet. Then he looked at Amani, and something different moved across his face. Involuntary, quick, immediately suppressed, but she caught it. Recognition. Not of her, but of something in her. Captain Yoon, Min-jae said. An acknowledgement. The chairman's vehicle is waiting at the Gijang interchange, Yoon said. We move in 3 minutes. My bag, Amani said. She picked it up from the floor beside the couch. Her library bag, still carrying her pathophysiology textbook, her notebook, her pen. The mundane artifacts of the life that had existed 6 hours ago. She didn't leave them behind. She shouldered the bag and looked at Min-jae. He looked back at her. In the flat utilitarian light from the open door, his face was exhausted and determined, and something else she didn't name. He nodded once. They went out into the cold. The drive north was 45 minutes on roads that moved inland and then elevated, climbing away from the coast into the mountains above Seoul's southern reach. The 2 vehicles moved fast without being reckless. Yoon sat in front beside the driver. Amani and Min-jae sat in the back, not touching, not talking, the silence between them carrying everything that couldn't be said in a moving vehicle surrounded by men who worked for a man. They were both, in different ways, about to stand in front of for the first time. At some point, Min-jae said very quietly, whatever he says to you in there, you don't have to accept any of it. You have the right to walk away from all of it. She looked at him. Do I? Yes, he said. Like he meant it. Like he needed her to believe it. She looked back out the window at the dark mountain road. I'll keep that in mind, she said. The estate was not what she had imagined, which told her something about her imagination's failure to scale properly to the world she'd stepped into. It was not a compound in the cinematic sense, no watchtowers, no visible weapons emplacements. What it was a fortified luxury property built into the mountainside, stone walls that looked aesthetic and were structural, A gatehouse staffed by men who looked like security contractors and were something more than that. Grounds that were dark and landscaped and almost certainly monitored at every point. The house itself was large and low and modern, all dark glass and pale stone, lights burning in 3 rooms on the upper floor. They pulled through the gate and around to a covered entrance. Yoon got out and opened her door. She stepped out onto the stone drive and the cold hit her, sharper up here than at the coast, thinner air against her face. She looked up at the house. She thought, my mother stood somewhere like this. She stood somewhere in this world and looked at it and decided it was not survivable for a daughter. She decided that Chicago and a borrowed name and double shifts at a hospital and Sunday pot roast were survivable. And she was right. She was right for 21 years. Amani straightened her coat and walked to the door. Park Seong-hoon was smaller than she'd expected. She had built some unconscious image of him from the fragments Min-jae had offered. 62, powerful, not prone to violence as a first language. She had expected something imposing in the physical sense. What she found instead was a compact man in a gray suit with silver at his temples and her mother's exact bone structure in his jaw. An observation that hit her like a physical impact and which she absorbed without showing. He was standing at the far end of a room that was all books and dark wood and windows looking out at the mountain dark. 2 men stood against the wall behind him. His hands were clasped in front of him. He looked at her the way she imagined a man looked at something he had waited a very long time for and was not sure he deserved. She stopped in the center of the room. Min-jae stopped 2 steps behind her and to the left. The silence lasted long enough to become something. Then Park said, in English, clear, precise, almost unaccented, "You look like her." "People keep saying that tonight," Amani said. Something moved in his face, not a smile, adjacent to one. "Sit down," he said. "Please." She sat. He sat. His men stayed standing. Min-jae stayed standing. The room had the quality of a space where significant things had been decided, and the weight of those decisions was still in the furniture. "Your mother," Park said. "She told me when she left that she would not contact me, that she would not allow me to contact her, that she was going to build a life for the child in a place where the child would never know this world." He paused. I agreed. "Why?" Imani said. "Because she was right," he said, flat, without self-pity. "This world is not survivable for people who aren't built for it. She wasn't built for it. She was a good woman who ended up in proximity to something that would have destroyed her." He looked at Imani. "I let her go because I loved her enough to know I was the danger." Imani held his gaze. "You've been looking for me," she said. "For 3 years," he said, "when my intelligence indicated she might be ill. I needed to know you existed in the world in a form I could account for." He paused. "Not to pull you in, just to know." "And now someone has pulled me in anyway," she said. "Yes." His jaw tightened fractionally. Choi Dong-wook made a choice tonight that has consequences. "We can talk about consequences," she said, "but first I need to know something." He waited. "My mother sent me here," she said, "to Korea. She pushed me toward the scholarship. She died knowing she was sending me to the one place she'd spent my entire life keeping me away from." She leaned forward, slightly. "Why? What did she know that changed the calculation?" Park was quiet for a long moment. His eyes moved to a point slightly left of her face and then returned. "I don't know for certain," he said. "What do you know?" He exhaled. 8 months ago," he said, "there was a security breach in my organization. Someone accessed records, my personal records, family genealogy, documented lineages, the kind of records that are maintained internally for succession planning." He paused. "I believe the breach originated inside the Dragon Crown Syndicate. I believe Choi Dong-wook found your existence in those records." Imani went still. "If your mother became aware that those records had been accessed," Park continued, "she would have known that someone now knew you existed. She would have known that her protection, the anonymity, the distance, the false name, had been compromised. So she sent me here," Imani said slowly. "Not because she wanted me to find you, because she knew that if someone was going to come for me, it was better for me to be closer to you than further away." Park looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "I believe that's what she calculated." Imani sat with that. Her mother, dying, had looked at the board and seen that the wall she'd built for 21 years had a crack in it and had made the only move available. Put her daughter inside the one perimeter strong enough to hold. She hadn't told Imani. She'd known Imani wouldn't have come if she'd known. So she had sent her with a letter and a direction and had trusted that the world would do the rest. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. "I need your help," she said to Park. "Not for me. For both of us. Choi Dong-wook has 60 men moving in Busan tonight. He was going to use me against you. He was going to—" She stopped, reset. "Put me on camera. Make you watch." Something happened in Park Seong-hun's face that she would not forget. It was brief, and it was total, and it was the most genuinely uncontrolled thing she had seen on an adult face in a very long time. His jaw set, and his eyes went to a place that had nothing in it that was diplomatic or measured or careful. Then it was gone, packed back down, managed. "I'm aware of what he intended," Park said. His voice was level. The levelness cost him something. "Then you know we need to move fast," she said. "He's going to figure out where I am. He has resources. He does not have resources that exceed mine," Park said, simply, factually. "Then use them," she said, "tonight, before he regroups." Park looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Min-jae, who had said nothing since they entered the room. The two men regarded each other, the head of one empire and the head of what had been another, looking at each other across a room in a mountainous state at 2 a.m. with the girl who connected them standing between them. "You chose her over your organization," Park said to Min-jae. "Yes," Min-jae said. "Why should I trust that choice?" "You shouldn't," Min-jae said. "Not on my word. On the evidence." He paused. "I have operational knowledge of Choi's full network, logistics, personnel, the 3 staging locations he uses for enforcement units near Busan. If you want to dismantle what he's built tonight, I'm the fastest route to that." Park considered this for a moment. "And what do you want in return?" "Out," Min-jae said. "After this is done. Clean. No pursuit from your organization, no debts called in later. I walk away from the Dragon Crown, and your people don't follow me." Park was quiet. Then slowly, he nodded. "Agreed." He looked at Imani. "And you," he said. "What do you want?" She had not expected the question to arrive so directly. She had been preparing for demands, conditions, the weight of a man trying to claim something. Not this. Not the simple, open architecture of a question directed at her. She looked at him. "I want to go back to nursing school," she said. "Eventually. I want to finish what my mother started me on." She paused. "But right now, tonight, I want Choi Dong-wook to not exist anymore." Park Seong-hun held her gaze for a long moment. "All right," he said. He unclasped his hands and turned to the men behind him and began issuing quiet, precise instructions. Imani exhaled. The room moved into action around her. Phones appeared. Voices rose and fell in rapid Korean. Maps were laid out on the table, hand-drawn with marked positions updated in real time as intelligence came in from Busan. And in the middle of all of it, Min-jae moved to stand beside her and said, very quietly, "You know, this isn't going to be clean." "Nothing has been clean since December," she said. He looked at her. When this is done, she said, "we'll talk about when this is done." She looked back at the map. "Right now I need to know the 3 staging locations." He looked at her for another second. Then he reached past her and pointed to the first mark on the map. Around them, the machinery of a criminal empire began to move, and somewhere south of them, on the dark Busan coast, Choi Dong-wook's phones were about to start ringing with news that his window had. Choi Dong-wook's phone started ringing at 3:17 in the morning. The first call came from his unit commander at the university housing complex. Nothing. The girl was gone. The room was clean. The second call came from the surveillance team he'd stationed on the coastal road north of Busan. 2 vehicles had passed heading north 40 minutes ago, plates registered to a shell company he didn't recognize, which meant he did recognize it, which meant Park Seong-hun had people in Busan that no one had accounted for. The third call he didn't answer because by then he already understood what the first 2 meant. Min-jae had gone to Park. He stood at the window of his Busan office tower on the 14th floor and looked at the harbor and felt something move through him that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite rage, but was the specific compound of both that arrived when a plan that had taken 14 months to build started coming apart at the load-bearing points. He had underestimated Min Jae's attachment to the girl. He had calculated sentiment as a manageable variable. He had been wrong. He picked up his phone and made the call he had been saving. "Move to Incheon," he said. "Tonight, all units. We take the port before dawn, or we don't take it at all." Thawed. The intelligence landed on the table in Park's mountain estate at 3:44 a.m. A text from one of Park's listening posts inside the Busan Port Authority, confirmed by a second source inside the Dragon Crown's logistics chain that Min Jae had quietly flipped 8 months ago and never told Choi about. Min Jae read it twice and looked up at Captain Yoon. "He's moving everything to Incheon," he said. "Full deployment. He's abandoning the Busan staging locations." Yoon looked at Park. Park was at the head of the table with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, which Amani understood was not a casual gesture, but a signal of some kind to the men around him. "He's going for the port directly," Park said. "Yes," Min Jae said. "If he takes Incheon Port before dawn, he controls the primary import corridor. He doesn't need me anymore. He doesn't need leverage over you. He just needs the port." "How long to move 60 men from Busan to Incheon?" Park said. 2 hours by highway, Min Jae said. "Less if he's already staged vehicles." Park looked at the clock on the wall. "Then we have 90 minutes. He looked at Yoon. "Get the convoy ready. All units." Yoon moved. The room emptied of everyone except Park, Min Jae, and Amani. Park looked at his daughter. She was standing at the edge of the table with her coat still on, her library bag on the floor beside her chair. And she was looking at the map with an expression he recognized because he had seen it in his own mirror for 30 years. The expression of someone calculating odds and finding them insufficient and deciding to proceed anyway. "You should stay here," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said. "This is going to be a war zone within 2 hours," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm a nursing student. If people get hurt, you're going to want me there." Park looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Min Jae. Min Jae said nothing, which was itself a kind of answer. Park exhaled through his nose. "You stay in the vehicle," he said. "Armored. You don't get out unless I say so." "Agreed," she said. She held his gaze for a half-second longer than was comfortable, and he saw something in it that he had not expected. Not deference, not performance. Something real. Something that had nothing to prove and everything to protect. "Let's go," she said. The convoy left the mountain estate at 4:02 a.m., 7 vehicles, all armored, moving north and then west on roads that were empty at this hour, the mountains giving way to the urban sprawl that thickened as they descended toward the coast. Amani sat in the third vehicle with Min Jae beside her and Yoon in front, and she watched the dark landscape resolve into highway lights, and then the first signs for Incheon, and felt the specific quality of fear that was not the paralyzing kind but the sharpening kind, the kind that came when a situation became so real and so immediate that everything non-essential simply dropped away. She thought about Denise Brooks driving to a double shift at 5 a.m. in February, the Chicago dark outside the windshield, the radio low. She thought about her mother doing the terrifying thing on the day-to-day basis that no one ever called terrifying because it was just called surviving. She thought, "I come from that. Whatever this is, I come from that." Min Jae's shoulder was an inch from hers. She could feel the tension in him through the inch of air between them. The controlled stillness was gone, replaced by something coiled and ready, a man who had spent 2 years behind a desk and a library table and was remembering against his will that he had been built for something different than that. "When we get there," he said quietly, "stay in the vehicle until Yoon clears the primary approach. If there's gunfire before we reach the corridor, the driver will pull back to the secondary position behind the warehouse block. You know what a secondary position is?" "Cover and concealment," she said. "Nursing simulations include mass casualty event protocols." He looked at her sideways. "Of course they do." "What's the plan for Choi?" she said. "Park's snipers take the high positions on the crane operators' platforms," he said. "The armored trucks block the corridor exits before Choi's convoy enters. When they're boxed in, you need him alive," she said. He paused. "Operationally, it's cleaner." "You need him alive," she said again. "If you kill him in there, you have 60 men with nothing to lose and nowhere to go. You want him alive and in front of his men so they see it happen, so they understand it's over." Min Jae looked at her, a long moment. "Yes," he said. That's correct. So someone has to get close enough to him to make that happen, she said. Yes. You, she said. Yes, he said. Me. She looked out the window. The first edge of the port complex was visible ahead. Vast, dark, container towers stacked against the pre-dawn sky like a giant's building blocks, the water beyond them flat and black and immense. The scale of it was disorienting. This was what it was all about. This infrastructure, these corridors, these channels of movement that were the arteries of a shadow economy that ran parallel to the visible one. She thought about a library table and 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee and thought, none of this was supposed to be my life. Then she thought, but here I am. They reached the outer perimeter of the Port Industrial Corridor at 4:38 a.m. Park's vehicles killed their lights and coasted to a stop behind the first warehouse block. Yoon was out before the vehicle fully stopped, moving along the wall with 2 men behind him. The night was bitterly cold, the ocean wind coming off the water in blasts that cut through Amani's coat like it wasn't there. She stayed in the vehicle. She watched through the tinted window. The corridor in question was a narrow passage between 2 rows of shipping container stacks, maybe 40 meters wide and 200 long, used for vehicle staging during port operations. Both ends were flanked by crane structures. 3 on the left, 2 on the right. Park's snipers were already climbing. She could see them only as shapes moving up the crane ladders, dark against a dark sky, and then disappearing. Min-jae got out. She reached forward and grabbed his arm before she thought about it. He looked back at her through the open door. The interior light of the vehicle was off. She could see his face in the diffuse glow from the distant port lights, the shadows under his eyes, the set of his jaw, the stillness that was back now but was different from the library stillness. This one had violence in it. She could see that clearly. Don't, she said. She meant don't die. She didn't say it directly because it was too large to say directly in a dark vehicle at 4:38 in the morning on the edge of a port corridor where 60 men were coming. He looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at her face. I'll be back, he said. That's not a plan? She said. No, he said. It's not. He put his hand over hers for 1 second, brief, deliberate, complete, and then he was out and moving and the door was closed and she was alone in the vehicle with the driver who hadn't spoken a word since the mountainous state. She pressed her back against the seat and breathed. So, Choi's convoy arrived at 4:51 a.m. She heard them before she saw them. The sound of multiple engines on the access road, a rumble that built and then separated into individual vehicles, 12 of them, large and dark, moving in 2 columns. They came from the south entrance of the corridor and slowed as they entered the passage between the container stacks, which meant Choi was being careful, which meant he knew or suspected something, which meant the armored trucks came from both ends simultaneously. They moved out from behind the container rows at the north and south exits of the corridor, blocking both ends with a speed that made the geometry of it immediate and total. Choi's 12 vehicles were inside the box with no exit and no room to turn. For a half-second, there was nothing, a held breath across the entire space. And then the spotlights hit, 4 of them from the crane platforms, flooding the corridor in white light that bleached everything to high contrast. The vehicles throwing hard shadows on the container walls. Then everything happened at once. The first shot came from somewhere inside Choi's column. Not at a target, she thought, but reflexive, someone's finger on a trigger when the lights hit. And that shot was the signal that fractured everything into chaos. Doors opened along the column and men spilled out using the vehicles as cover, and the crack of gunfire multiplied and echoed between the metal container walls until it was a continuous roar. Imani's driver said something in Korean and started to pull back. Stop, she said. Miss, stop the car, she said. I can see the corridor from here. If you pull back, I'm blind. He stopped. Reluctantly, every line of his body communicating that this was not what he had been told to do. But he stopped. She watched through the window. The park snipers on the cranes were working methodically. She could see the results, if not the shots themselves. Men going down along the column, not clustered but spread, taking the outer perimeter of Choi's defenders. The armored trucks at both ends absorbed the fire that came at them without result. The corridor was becoming a very efficient kill box, and Min-jae was somewhere inside it. She found him. He had come in from the east side through a gap in the container wall that the snipers had cleared for him. She could see the gap, a maintenance access between two stacked rows, and she saw him move through it with two of Park's men behind him, moving along the east wall inside the corridor, using the vehicles as cover between him and Choi's central position. Choi's vehicle was the fourth in the column. She could tell because it was the one that hadn't opened. Everyone else had spilled out to fight, and that vehicle stayed closed, which meant Choi was inside it calculating, which meant he was the same kind of man as Min Jae, the kind who thought before he moved. She watched Min Jae close the distance along the wall. 12 meters. 10. A burst of fire from somewhere, and she lost him behind a vehicle, and her heart rate spiked, and then she found him again, down on one knee behind a truck's front axle, bleeding from his left forearm. She could see the dark stain on his sleeve, the way he held the arm slightly stiff. Not incapacitating. He was still moving. He reached Choi's vehicle. He stood against the passenger door and said something. She couldn't hear it through the glass and the noise, but she saw his mouth move and she saw the effect. The gunfire from Choi's men slackened, not stopped, slackened. Because Min Jae's voice was still something these men responded to, even here, even now, because he had been their boss and the body remembered authority. The door of Choi's vehicle opened. Choi Dong-wook was a big man, broader than Min Jae, older by a decade, with a face that had the particular weathered quality of someone who had spent years doing the things that Min Jae had spent years ordering done. He got out of the vehicle with his hands at his sides and looked at Min Jae. And the quality of that look crossed the distance and the noise and was visible even through tinted glass. Contempt. Genuine contempt. The contempt of a man who had always believed he understood the situation better than the people around him. She couldn't hear what they said. She watched their mouths. She watched their bodies, Min Jae upright and bleeding and completely still, Choi wider in his stance, the stance of a man who believed he still had options. Then Choi moved. Not toward Min Jae, away, a pivot, fast for a man his size, going for the gap in the container wall. Going for the exit that Min Jae had used to come in. Min Jae moved faster. She had not fully understood until this moment what Min Jae was physically capable of when the pretense was gone. In the library he had been still. On the waterfront he had been measured. Here he was something else entirely. The transition was immediate and total, a man dropping whatever overlay he'd been operating under and becoming what he had been trained to be. He closed the distance to Choi in 4 steps, and the impact between them was audible, even through the vehicle glass. A collision that sent both men against the container wall. Choi was bigger. Min Jae was faster and had spent 2 years behind a desk and was running on nothing and adrenaline and bleeding from his arm. And the fight was brutal and tight and wrong-looking. Not the choreographed kind, but the real kind, where both men were trying to do damage and prevent damage simultaneously, and the geometry of it was ugly and desperate. Amani had her hand on the door handle. "Don't," the driver said. She watched. Choi got a hand around Min Jae's throat. Min Jae's left arm, the bleeding one, was compromised, and she could see him compensating, shifting his weight, trying to use his right. But Choi had the angle and the mass, and he was driving Min Jae's back against the container wall, and Min Jae's feet were losing purchase on the ground. "I'm getting out," Amani said. "Miss," the chairman said. She opened the door. The cold hit her like a wall. The noise hit her harder. The gunfire was tapering now. Park's forces had the corridor contained, but the ambient roar of it was still everywhere, bouncing off the metal surfaces in every direction. She moved along the outside of the vehicle toward the corridor entrance, staying low, staying against the container wall, doing the thing her body knew how to do, which was move toward the emergency rather than away. She was 12 feet from the gap in the container wall when one of Choi's men came through it. He was young, mid-20s, moving fast, looking back over his shoulder at something pursuing him. He turned forward and saw her and stopped. They looked at each other for 1 full second. She was a black woman in a winter coat with a library bag still over her shoulder. He was an armed man who had just lost a battle and was trying to exit a kill box. She looked at him and thought about 12 different things simultaneously, and the one that rose to the top was, "He doesn't know who I am." "Get down," she said to him. In Korean. Flat, no inflection, the voice she used in simulation lab when she needed compliance fast. He blinked. "Down," she said again. "It's over. Get down and put your hands where I can see them. He looked behind him, looked at her, looked at the two of Park's men who had just come through the gap with weapons raised. He lowered himself to his knees. She went through the gap. Inside the corridor, the fight had concentrated into 3 points. The armored trucks at each end, where the last of Choi's resistance was crumbling, and the east wall, where Min-jae and Choi were still against the container. Choi's hand was still at Min-jae's throat. Min-jae's right hand had found a grip on Choi's wrist and was working against it, methodical despite everything, but he was losing color in his face, and his feet were 12 inches off the ground. She crossed the corridor at a run. She didn't have a weapon. She had a library bag containing a pathophysiology textbook that weighed approximately 4 pounds. She swung it with both hands and hit Choi Dong-wook across the back of the head with the full centrifugal force of a running start and 4 pounds of medical literature. It was not a movie hit. It didn't drop him. What it did was break his concentration. His grip loosened, his head turned. He looked at her with an expression of pure disbelieving confusion, and that half-second was what Min-jae needed. Min-jae's feet found the ground. His right elbow came up, and the impact to Choi's jaw was compact and precise, and completely unlike the swinging, desperate version of the last 2 minutes. It was controlled, it was targeted, and Choi went sideways and hit the container wall and went down. Min-jae stood over him, breathing hard, his left arm hanging slightly wrong, his face the color of concrete. He looked at Imani. She looked at him. "I told you to stay in the vehicle," he said. His voice was wrecked from the grip on his throat. "I did stay in the vehicle," she said. "For a while." He looked at the bag in her hands. He looked at Choi on the ground. He made a sound that was not a laugh, but was in the neighborhood of one, rough and broken, and it cost him something to make it, because he put his good hand against the container wall to stay upright. She was already moving to him. Nursing school. Her hands found his left arm. The wound was a graze, deep but not arterial. She could tell from the bleed pattern, and she pressed her palm against it with the direct clinical pressure of someone who had done this in simulation 100 times and was discovering that the real version was wetter and hotter and smelled like iron. "I need something to tie this," she said. He reached inside his jacket with his right hand and pulled out what appeared to be a zip tie. She stared at it. "Crime boss," he said, by way of explanation. She took it, made do. Around them, the corridor was going quiet. Not the absolute quiet of before. There were voices, movement, the sound of Park's men moving through Choi's defeated units, but the specific quiet that arrived when a battle resolved. The heavy silence of after. Choi was on the ground, conscious, staring at the container ceiling with the flat, empty expression of a man whose calculations had all come out wrong. 2 of Park's men stood over him. He wasn't going anywhere. Captain Yoon appeared at her shoulder. He looked at Min-jae's arm, looked at Imani's improvised field dressing, looked at her face. "The chairman wants a count," he said, to Min-jae. "Give me a minute," Min-jae said, to Imani. "You hit him with a textbook." "It was the heaviest thing I had," she said. "Pathophysiology," he said, still looking at her arm, still holding the wall. "Ironic," she said, "given the situation." He looked at her. She looked at him. In the white blaze of the spotlights, with the battle cooling around them, and Choi's empire dismantled in a 40-meter corridor, and the dawn starting to put a gray edge on the eastern sky above the container towers, they were 2 people standing in the aftermath of something enormous, and looking at each other across the distance of everything they had both just done. She heard footsteps behind her, deliberate, unhurried. Park Seong-hoon walked into the corridor. He had not fought. She understood now that he never fought directly, that he was the kind of man who built systems that fought for him. But he had been in the rear vehicle, and he walked through the aftermath of the corridor with the specific quality of a man who had seen worse and was assessing this against a long catalog of worse. He looked at Choi on the ground. He looked at his men. He looked at Min-jae. Then he looked at Imani. She was standing in the middle of an Incheon port corridor at 5 in the morning with blood on her hands, not her own, and a zip tie she'd improvised as a wound dressing and a library bag hanging off her shoulder, and she was the only person in this corridor who was not a criminal, who had not chosen this world, who had been brought here by a dead woman's last calculated decision and a library table and the worst cup of vending machine coffee in South Korea. Park Seong-hoon looked at his daughter in the middle of all of it, and something moved through his face that he didn't manage away this time. He let it stay. He walked toward her and stopped 2 feet away and said very quietly, "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. He looked at Minjae's arm, at the blood on her hands from pressing the wound. He looked back at her face. "You got out of the vehicle," he said. "Yes," she said. "I told you not to." "I know," she said. He held her gaze, and then, so briefly that she almost missed it, almost but didn't, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Something older than a smile, something that had waited 21 years and was only now, in this ruined corridor at the edge of dawn, being allowed to. The corner of his mouth moved, and then he turned away because Park Seong-hoon was not a man who let things stay on his face long enough for other people to catalog them, and he walked back toward Yoon and the business of accounting for what had just happened in this corridor. And Imani watched him go and understood that this was how it was going to be with him. Not easy, not warm in any conventional sense, not the reunion that movies manufactured. Something harder than that. Something that might, over a very long time, become real. She was okay with that. She turned back to Min-jae. He was still against the container wall, his color returning slowly, his right hand pressed over her improvised dressing on his left arm. He was watching her with the particular focus of a man who had been managing too many things simultaneously and had finally narrowed down to one. "Hospital," she said. "That arm needs a proper dressing and probably stitches." "Later," he said. "Now," she said. "You lost enough blood that your pallor is concerning, and your grip strength on that wall is going to give out in about 4 minutes." He looked at his hand on the wall. He looked at her. "You can tell that from looking." "I'm a nursing student," she said. "Get in the vehicle." They took Choi Dong-wook to a facility she was not told the location of. She did not ask. She understood, in the broad strokes of it, what happened to men like Choi when they lost. Not execution, or not necessarily, but a removal from the board so complete and so permanent that it amounted to the same thing in terms of consequence. She did not ask the details. She filed away the not asking as one of the first small accommodations she was making to this world, and she noted the filing, and she held it where she could see it. She wanted to be honest with herself about what she was accommodating and what she was refusing to accommodate. That line was going to matter. She could already tell. Min-jae's arm was treated at the mountain estate by a doctor who arrived in a car with Busan plates and asked no questions and did her work with the efficient silence of someone on retainer for exactly this kind of situation. Imani watched the procedure from across the room. Butterfly sutures, proper dressing, a saline flush that Min-jae took without reaction, and thought about Northwestern Memorial and her mother's double shifts and the clean fluorescent logic of a hospital where the reasons for the injuries were documented and addressed and not simply managed around. She was sitting in an armchair with her library bag in her lap when Park Seong-hoon came into the room. He looked at Min-jae's arm. He looked at the doctor. He looked at Imani. "Come," he said to her. "There are things that need to be said." "Mom." The room he took her to was at the back of the house, smaller than the main meeting room, more personal in the sense that it contained things that had not been staged for effect. A desk, a bookshelf with actual books, not decorative spines, a framed photograph on the shelf that she saw immediately and then made herself look away from because she was not ready yet. He stood at the window. She stood in the center of the room. "The Dragon Crown Syndicate will dissolve within the week," he said. "Without Choi and without Min-jae, there is no coherent leadership. The outer network will absorb into existing structures or disintegrate. The port operations in Busan will revert to neutral management." "That's the operational summary," she said. "That's not what needs to be said." He turned from the window. He looked at her with the full directness of it. No management, no containment. "No," he said. "It's not." She waited. "Your mother," he said. "I want you to know that what I told you was the complete truth. She came to me in 2002, already knowing she was pregnant. She told me she was leaving. She said the child, if it was a girl, she said she already knew it was going to be a girl, would be named Imani. She said Imani meant faith. She said she was going to need it." He paused. "I asked her not to go. She told me that asking her to stay was the same as asking her to destroy what she was trying to build. I didn't have an answer for that." Imani stood with it. "You let her go," she said. "Yes." "You had the power to stop her," she said. Not an accusation, a statement. Yes, he said. I had that power. He held her gaze. I didn't use it. She thought about what that cost him. She thought about it genuinely, without the reflex of resentment, trying to see it clearly. A man who operated in a world built on leverage and force, choosing not to use either on the one person he might have needed to. She didn't know if that was love or guilt or some combination of both that couldn't be separated out. She suspected he didn't fully know either. She died in August, Amani said. Pancreatic cancer. She was diagnosed in April, and she was gone by August. He said nothing. His face was still. But his hands, she noticed, had moved. His right hand had come up and pressed flat against his sternum, briefly, a gesture so private and so involuntary that she thought he didn't know he'd made it. She looked at the shelf. She looked at the photograph. She made herself look at it fully this time. It was her mother. Young, early 20s, the way she looked in the photographs from before Chicago, from the shoebox Imani had found while going through the apartment, standing outside a building that looked like it might have been a university or an administrative office, standing beside a man who was younger than the man in front of her by 30 years, but was recognizably the same person in the bone structure of the face. They were both looking at the camera. They were not touching. But the distance between them in the photograph was the distance between two people who were choosing the gap deliberately, who had agreed on the gap, and the agreement was visible in the inches between their shoulders. She looked at the photograph for a long time. I'm not going back to Chicago, she said finally. Park turned slightly. Not yet, she said. I'm going to finish the program. The scholarship year. She met his eyes. My mother sent me here to finish the program. That's what I'm going to do. He was quiet for a moment. And after, she said, we'll talk about after. She paused. I'm not walking away from this. From you. I want to be clear about that. But I'm also not walking into whatever role your captains have already started calculating in their heads. She watched his face. You have 2 sons. Tell them not to be threatened. I'm not here for a throne. I'm here because my mother sent me here and I'm going to figure out what that means at my own pace. Park Seong-hoon looked at his daughter for a long moment. The window light was changing behind him. Dawn was fully up now, the sky pale and cold through the glass, the first real light of a morning that had been a very long time coming. Your mother would have said something very similar, he said. Quiet, without performance. Good, Imani said. She left the room. She walked back down the hallway to where Min-jae was sitting in a chair with his arm properly dressed and his head tipped back against the wall. Not asleep, but the next thing to it, the absolute depletion of a man who had spent 12 hours running on nothing but consequence. She sat down in the chair beside him. He opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then at her. How'd it go? He said. His voice was still rough. We talked, she said. It's going to take a long time. Yeah, he said. He's not what I expected. No one in this situation is what anyone expects, he said. She looked at her hands in her lap. The blood was gone. She'd washed it off in the bathroom down the hall, the water running rust-colored for 30 seconds and then clear. But she could still feel the ghost of it, the pressure of Min-jae's arm under her palm in that corridor. Your agreement with him, she said. He'll honor it? Park Seong-hoon honors agreements, Min-jae said. It's one of the things that makes him what he is. And what are you going to do? She said. After. He was quiet for a long moment. The ceiling above them was pale plaster and had nothing interesting on it. I have money set aside, he said. Legal. The economics degree is real. The research is real. I've been building towards something legitimate for 3 years. He paused. I don't know exactly what it becomes, but it's there. In Busan? She said. I don't know, he said. Maybe. She nodded. She looked at the ceiling too. I have 14 more weeks in the program, she said. Simulation labs on Mondays and Wednesdays. Pharmacology on Thursdays. He turned his head to look at her. The library's going to be very quiet, she said, without someone taking up the center table. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was open in a way it had not been in the library, in the vehicle, in the corridor. The way things opened up in people after the worst had happened, and there was nothing left to protect, except the thing that actually mattered. I could audit an economics seminar, he said. Thursdays. She looked back at the ceiling. You'd have to buy your own coffee, she said. The machine on the third floor is terrible, he said. I know, she said. I've been drinking it for 3 months. The silence between them after that was not the silence of before. Not the library silence, dense and managed and full of things held back. It was the silence of after, which was different. Lighter, somehow, despite everything it contained. 3 days later, she went back to Busan. Park sent 2 of his men with her. Discreetly. A vehicle that maintained a distance she could pretend wasn't there if she needed to. She had negotiated this. She had told him clearly, I am not a package to be transported. I am a person with a schedule, and if you want me to tolerate protection detail, it needs to be invisible enough that I can function. He had agreed with the slight nod of a man who recognized a position that was not negotiable and chose his battles accordingly. She filed that away too. She was building a catalog of him, the way she had built a catalog of Min Jae over November and December. Learning him in the small, consistent details, which was the only way to learn anyone who didn't give themselves easily. The university looked exactly as she had left it. This was almost offensive. The library, the cafeteria, the simulation lab with its fluorescent lights and its plastic mannequins and its smell of artificial antiseptic. All of it was indifferent to the fact that the person walking through it had spent 3 days in a mountain estate north of Seoul, learning the shape of a father she had never known existed, while the criminal empire built to use her against him burned itself out in an Incheon port corridor. She went to the simulation lab on Monday. She went to pharmacology on Thursday. The library table on Thursday night was empty. She sat down. She unpacked her bag. Pathophysiology textbook, notebook, pen. She set them out in the order she always set them out. She looked at the chair across from her. She looked at the 2 power strips and the overhead lamp and the high windows showing a sky that was clearing for the first time in weeks, the cloud cover pulling back to show something that was almost blue in the late afternoon light. She opened her notebook. She studied for 2 hours. At 8:15, the chair across from her pulled back. Min Jae sat down. He had a thermos. His own, not the machine. He set it on the table and then produced a second cup, small, ceramic, which he filled from the thermos and pushed across to her without looking up, the exact motion of someone who had done this enough times that it required no ceremony. She looked at the cup. She looked at him. He had opened a laptop and was reading something, and the quality of his stillness was the library stillness, the real one, the one that didn't have violence running underneath it. He had a neat line of sutures on his left forearm where the sleeve was rolled up. He looked like what he had always looked like at this table, a graduate student who took things seriously. She picked up the cup. The coffee was not from a vending machine. It was actual coffee, which meant he had gotten to Busan early enough to find a decent cafe, which meant he had planned to be here at this specific time, which was information she noted and did not comment on. She drank. She studied. At 10 o'clock, she looked up and said, What are you actually researching? Port logistics economics, he said. Shadow markets and their relationship to formal import infrastructure. The legal version. She looked at him. You're writing your thesis on the industry you just left. The knowledge is accurate, he said. The application will be different. She held his gaze. That's either brilliant or insane. Possibly both, he said. She went back to her notes. He went back to his screen. The reading room was quiet around them, the overhead lamps warm, the high windows showing a wedge of night sky that had stars in it, actual stars. The cloud cover finally gone. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen stars over Busan. Maybe she never had. In the weeks that followed, she built a life that was 2 things simultaneously, and the doubling was uncomfortable and necessary, and she did not pretend otherwise. There was the program, the simulation labs, the pharmacology exams, the clinical observation rotations at a Busan hospital, where she spent 2 days a week in the wards learning the shape of real medicine as opposed to the practiced version. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. Her attending supervisor, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Song, who had no patience for performance and complete respect for competence, told her in week 3 that she had better clinical instincts than half the residents Dr. Song had supervised in her career. Amani accepted this without deflecting. Her mother had taught her to accept what was true without flinching. And there was the other life. The calls with Park Seong-hun twice a week, that began as briefings and became, incrementally and awkwardly and with many false starts, something closer to conversation. He told her about the Park dynasty's legitimate holdings, the shipping operation, the pharmaceutical distribution network, the real estate arm that he had been quietly cleaning for 5 years in preparation for a transition he had not publicly announced. He told her about her half-brothers, Zhongjae, the elder, who was serious and competent, and would be threatened by her regardless of what she did, and Minho, the younger, who was less competent and would be threatened by her in a different way. He told her these things plainly, without spin, which she appreciated. She told him about nursing school, about the clinical rotations, about Dr. Song, about her mother's habit of arguing with the television and always losing. He listened. He was, she discovered, a very good listener. She supposed that made sense. A man who had built and maintained a complex empire for 20 years had to understand information at a level most people didn't reach. She did not call him father, not yet. She called him nothing. She addressed him directly, without title, and he accepted this with the slight nod that she had come to recognize as his version of accommodation. She was building something. She didn't know its final shape yet. She was okay with that. In February, she flew to Chicago for a week. She had told Park. She had not asked permission. She had told him, which was a distinction she maintained with precision, and he had understood the distinction, and he had arranged for the discreet presence to extend to American territory without commenting on the logic of it. She went back to the apartment above the laundromat. The super had kept it as she'd left it. She'd kept paying rent from the scholarship stipend because she hadn't been able to make herself call and cancel. She stood in the doorway for a full minute before going in. The apartment smelled like her mother. Faintly, 4 months was a long time, and the smell was more memory than actual. But it was there in the particular quality of the warm air from the heating vent and the smell of the coat closet, and something she couldn't locate or name that was simply and completely Denise Brooks. She sat on the couch. She sat there for a long time. She went through the nightstand drawer again. She took out the photograph. The faded one, her mother young and serious outside the building in Seoul, the words on the back. Don't look for it, please. She held it and looked at it and thought about everything her mother had known and carried and decided and calculated and managed alone for 21 years, with no one to share it with, building a wall with one hand and a daughter with the other. She thought, you couldn't tell me. I understand now that you couldn't tell me, but I want you to know that I found it anyway, and it was terrifying, and I survived it, and I think you knew I would. She did not cry. She had been expecting to, and she didn't. And after a while she understood that the crying was done. Not because the grief was done. Grief didn't work like that. But because she had moved through something in the last 3 months that had changed the shape of what she was carrying. It was still heavy. It would always be heavy. But it was a different configuration now. She went to Northwestern Memorial on her 3rd day. She went to the ward where her mother had worked, and she found the charge nurse who had worked beside Denise Brooks for 11 years. A woman named Kathleen, broad and direct, who had come to the funeral and stayed for the whole thing. And she sat with Kathleen in the break room for 2 hours, and they talked about her mother in a way that nobody had talked about her with Imani yet. Not the grief version, the real version. The woman who had argued about medication protocols in team meetings and won. The woman who had remembered every patient's family member by name. The woman who had, Kathleen said with a particular emphasis, been the kind of nurse that made other nurses want to be better. Imani listened. She filed it all away. She held it. On her last day in Chicago, she went to her mother's bank and transferred the remaining balance to the account she had set up for what she was building. The foundation had not been formally established yet. She was working with Park's legal team on the structure, a process that was slower and more complicated than she'd anticipated, and that she was refusing to let be rushed. But the money was there. The intention was there. She had her mother's precise handwriting on the back of a faded photograph, and 11 years of Kathleen's stories, and the specific sound of a woman's voice on a night shift elevator, and she was going to build something out of that. Eat. She flew back to Korea on a Thursday. Min-jae was at the library table when she got there at 9:30 at night, still in her travel clothes, her suitcase in the university housing lobby where she'd dropped it on the way through. She sat down. He looked up. He pushed the ceramic cup toward her. Already filled, still warm, which meant he'd timed it, which was information she held gently and did not examine too closely. "Chicago?" he said. "Yeah," she said. "How was it?" She wrapped both hands around the cup. "Hard," she said. "Good. Both." She looked at him. "I went to the hospital where she worked, talked to someone who knew her for years." He nodded. "It helped," she said. And then, because it was true and because she had decided, somewhere over the Pacific, to stop hedging the true things. "I thought about her the whole flight back, about what she decided to do, choosing this over Korea, building what she built." She looked at her cup. "And I thought, she made the right call. For the time that she had, she made exactly the right call. But the time changed, and so the call has to change too." Min-jae was quiet. He was watching her with the full attention he'd always given her at this table, the attention that was not performance, that had no agenda underneath it. "The foundation," she said. "I want it to fund nursing students, South Korea and the United States both. Students who are carrying debt, carrying family obligations, carrying the weight of being the first person in their family to reach for something like medicine." She paused. "My mother's name on it." "Yes," he said, simply. "And this library," she said. She looked up at the high windows, at the overhead lamps, at the long wooden table that had been, for 3 months, the whole geography of something she hadn't had a name for. A permanent endowment, reading room, in her name. He looked at her. "I'll donate to it," he said. "Considerably." She looked at him sideways. "The money is legal," he said. "The accounts are clean. I had them audited 6 months ago in anticipation of—" He paused. "In anticipation of change." She looked at the table. She looked at the chair across from her where he was sitting. She thought about the first night, the pen rolling off the table, the hand catching it without looking up, the single syllable that had passed for acknowledgement. She thought about the harbor at night, the colors cycling on the bridge, the chestnuts in the paper cone. "Min-jae," she said. He looked up. "When I finish the program," she said, "I'm going back to DePaul, the nursing degree. I'm finishing what I started." She held his gaze. "That's going to be Chicago. A year, maybe 2. "I know," he said. "And after that," she said, "I'm coming back here, to whatever this is." She meant all of it. Park, the foundation, the legal machinery, the 2 phone calls a week that were becoming something neither of them had a word for yet. "But that's the order. Program, then Chicago, then this." He nodded. "You're not going to say anything about that," she said. "What would you like me to say?" he said. "I don't know," she said. "Something." He looked at his laptop. He looked at his coffee. He looked at her across the table in the warm lamplight of the library reading room where everything between them had started. "I'll be here," he said. "Or somewhere. I'll still be standing when you get back." It was not a romantic declaration. It was not a promise wrapped in music. It was the thing Min-jae was capable of offering, which was a fact, stated plainly, with the full weight of a man who did not say things he didn't intend to keep. She held it. It was enough. More than enough. She opened her notebook. She uncapped her pen. She went back to her notes. He went back to his screen. The library was quiet around them. The high windows showed a clear night, February cold, sharp and clean, the stars visible from the 4th floor for the first time in months. Somewhere below the ridge on the far edge of the city, Busan Harbor was doing what it always did, moving, shifting, the constant silent commerce of a world that did not stop for any particular drama, that simply continued in the dark. On the table between them, 2 cups. Neither was from the vending machine. But it distant 3 months later, on the day she submitted her final clinical portfolio and completed the Korean-American Medical Exchange Program, Park Seong-hun called at 7 in the evening. She was sitting on the floor of her dormitory room with her portfolio printed and bound in her lap and her suitcase half-packed in the corner. "You finished," he said. Not a question. He had been tracking the date. "I finished," she said. A pause. The quality of it was different from the early calls, less formal, less careful. They had logged enough hours now that the careful had worn off somewhat, the way paint wore off on surfaces that were touched regularly. What was underneath was harder to describe. "Your mother would have—" He stopped himself. "Yeah," she said. She would have. He was quiet for a moment. Safe travels, he said. Chicago. I'll call when I land, she said. She almost said his name at the end of it. The word for father in Korean was a small word, one syllable when said with the informal weight of it, the weight of actual use rather than ceremony. She had been holding it for 3 months, not sure if she was ready, not sure if readiness was even the right framework. Maybe it wasn't something you waited to be ready for. Maybe you just said it and then it was true. She said it. One syllable. Quiet. Into the phone in an empty dormitory room with a half-packed suitcase and a finished portfolio and the whole large, uncertain architecture of a life that was not the one she had arrived expecting to live. The pause on the line was long enough that she wondered if she'd misjudged. Then Park Seong-hun said, in a voice that had something in it she had not heard from him before, something that had clearly not been used in a very long time. Good night, Imani. She put the phone down. She looked at the dormitory ceiling. She breathed in and breathed out and felt the weight of the last 4 months. The library, the harbor, the corridor, the mountain estate, the Chicago apartment, the conversation in the back room of the house with the photograph on the shelf, settle into her body not as something that needed to be resolved, but as something that had become simply part of what she was. She stood up. She finished packing. Outside the dormitory window, Busan was what it always was at night, wet and lit and indifferent to the private weight of any individual moving through it. The harbor beyond the city was dark and immense. And somewhere in the city, a man she had met at a library table was sitting at a different table now, working on something legal, building towards something different, and he would be standing when she came back. She zipped the suitcase. She put her notebook in her bag. The pen. The pathophysiology textbook with the dented cover where it had met the back of Choi Dong-wook's head in a port corridor at 5 in the morning. She turned off the light. She walked out.